The story begins with the fact that the nurses of the Divine Hospital spoke among themselves about the legends of the hospital. There were 5 of them in total, and one of them was in the next room. Meanwhile, the main character has not yet come to his senses and was connected to the life support apparatus. Uhei was a practical doctor, whose soul once touched the angel. Suddenly, a demonic elemental appeared in the ward, which smelled a divine aura emanating from E. Ghost understood that if he absorbs the soul of a young master, he could evolve. In this connection, the evil spirit immediately began the absorption of the guy. But at that moment, Wei entered the ward and froze the elemental with only a movement. Bai menacingly stated that she would not allow such a thing to happen and headed for the ghost. The sealed demon no longer carried threats. The girl also determined his rank and was surprised. We inflicted a lightning punch, and a block of ice scattered into small pieces. Then she went to Uhu and asked the head who was actually this young man. Behind her immediately appeared a kind of haze, which had huge green eyes. The creature said that the teenager is called E, and he studied at the medical faculty at the University of Beijing. But Bai still could not understand why the demon rank came for him. After all, the guy was absolutely the same, as they did not stand out among the rest. At this time, Uhai wandered through the memoirs in his mind, where he began to knock on closed doors. After a certain number of unsuccessful attempts, he sat down on the ground and sighed hopelessly. The young man did not understand where he was, and did not know how to get out of this room. Suddenly he leaned on the door, and she suddenly opened, thus, the teenager was outside. Uhei was extremely surprised, because before that he unsuccessfully tried to open it. A rather strange picture opened before him. In addition, the condition of the young man worsened sharply. Yi discovered a hospital in front of him, and could not understand how she was here. All this looked extremely suspicious. At first he fought at the closed door, which was open, and now the hospital appeared. Suddenly an unknown voice said that due to a lack of oxygen in the brain, his mental abilities have temporarily decreased. The dumbfounded Uhei began to look around and asked who said it. A stranger immediately came out of the shadow and stated that it was a great honor for him to serve him. The unknown called the manager of the Divine Hospital and said that he could call him the number alone. The perplexing guy again asked if it was a reliable hospital and how he ended up here. The head physician replied that this is the best hospital and the young man would be satisfied, after which he opened the doors and invited Uhai inside. The teenager carefully looked around. Then he came to the conclusion that this hospital is very similar to the one where it was held the internship. Approaching some statue of an unknown person, he asked who he was. The number 1 said that it was a former manager, who transferred the hospital to the possession of Uhai. The surprised guy asked if he could leave her. The head physician answered positively and asked the Malts to sign a certain agreement. The contract concerned precisely the transfer of the Divine Hospital in the hands of E. The young man instantly put his signature. The manager was surprised and asked if the guy does not want to look at the terms of the contract. Then Uhei asked a counter question if he could leave without signing the contract. Number 1 answered negatively. In the end result, E did not reread the contract and handed it over to the head doctor. The system immediately discovered damage to the chest in the newly made head of the hospital. A moment later, the young man literally evaporated, not understanding what was happening. Soon Uhei was on a stone pedestal as a statue. The room was illuminated by a sudden light. After a few seconds, a bright radiance has gained a human appearance. It was a kind of archangel, the appearance of which number 1 was not very happy and fixed his gaze at him. Some time passed, and E gradually mastered in a new place as a manager. Suddenly, Uhei decided to go to the operating room, where the doctors were. Suddenly, someone put their hands on their shoulders and asked what they planned. The teenager, in turn, was very scared and dropped a flashlight from his hands. At night, the main character and his partner decided to arrange a late dinner. However, one of the doctors did not like this, and he stated that they violate the rules of the hospital. Then the young master invited him to make them a company and have a bite to eat together. But the angry doctor took all the food from them and said that their behavior is unacceptable. Uhei tried to object to him, but the doctor insisted on his own, and E, with the intern, were left without dinner. At the same time, an embittered doctor added that they continue to adhere to the local rules. The guy in turn said sadly that this would no longer happen again. Since the meal was cancelled, the young man went to sleep to his ward. But there were problems with sleep. A teenager tossed from side to side for a long time, but could not fall asleep. Suddenly, he heard the characteristic sounds of the champing and looked behind the curtain, saying that a friend is an egoist because he decided to have dinner himself and did not invite him to a snack. But suddenly Uhei noticed that the internet was lying on the bed, and the unknown sat at his feet. Soon the stranger turned around and E saw a living dead in front of him. The guy for a while was confused, not knowing what to do and how to act in this situation. His friend asked for help with a stifled voice. Uhei looked compassionately. Then the frightened young man backed back to call someone to the aid. But the zombie demon suddenly attacked him. He immediately bounced to the side. Then he grabbed a chair and struck the ill-wisher. But this did not reassure the monster. Then Uhei began to look for the next hardware and saw a thermos, who immediately threw at the monster. The monster in turn grabbed his head. He took advantage of the moment, while the demon was writhing in pain and rushed to a friend. Thus, the teenager grabbed the interns and dragged him on his back to the exit. By that time, the zombie dead man had come to his senses and jumped after them into the corridor. Where he went along their bloody trail, Uhei hurried to prevent the opportunity to overtake them. But at this moment, the infected internet turned into the same insatiable monster. Subsequently, which he inflicted a sharp blow to the back the young man was a terrible pain. The mutant said that now a miserable little man knows true suffering. A demonic aura hung around him. Uhei understood that this was no longer a man. Suddenly, his consciousness was subjected to inexplicable changes. The young man faced the archangel, after which he fell through the golden floor and saw two nurses who discussed the death of his parents. They were sincerely sorry that a teenager at such a young age went such a gloomy path. Soon, he turned around and once again appeared before the unknown archangel, who urged him to come to terms with his fate because he is not able to change her. However, Uhei dared to object to him, which brought the divine servant bewilderment. The young man literally grew up and said that he would not put up with the like, then rushed in his direction. After which he inflicted a lightning punch of the archangel. Rivers of blood poured. The body suddenly ignited, which testified to his madness. Uhei's eyes were filled with bright light, and he said that there was enough from him. The fire began to diverge throughout the district. The teenager was inexplicable. Soon he again discovered himself in the middle of the corridor in front of a zombie dead man. He said that because of him, he was left without his relatives and inflicted a crushing blow. The angry Uhei continued to attack the monster, accusing him of all sins. The demon in response only smiled that he only angered the guy even more, and he rushed in his direction. At this moment, the hand of was ignited again. The teenager hastened to hold the next series of attacks. Suddenly, a fiery blade appeared in his hand, which sparkled with numerous lightning. It seemed that Uhei himself did not know that such an unimaginable divine force lurked in him. The same archangel suddenly appeared behind him, as if he were subordinate to the young man. A moment later, a huge divine beam passed through the whole building and rushed into the sky. Wei was shocked by what was happening, and immediately went to the scene, realizing perfectly that this force is subject to only the owner of the kingdom of the spirit of the rank of S. At this time, Lu approached her and said that in fact these are the abilities of God. Hua, member of the city district, added that this power was previously only among the Archangel Michael. The dumbfounded Bai said that they need to find this person so that this power does not fall into the hands of the attackers. The representative of the 114th team replied that some are already dealing with this issue. It turned out to be an agent of Jinshan, who had already arrived at the Divine Hospital. Shu in turn noticed that this person is extremely talented and it is possible to act late, but it is worth trying. Meanwhile, the main character killed a reincarnated friend in a monster. The young master looked at his bloodied body and understood that he could not save him. Uhei bowed his head over the corpse of the intern and asked him for forgiveness. Suddenly, the demon chasing them said that he could not even save himself. The dumbfounded turned out and saw in front of him the same zombie, which, in turn, was just a couple of steps and again rushed to him. The guy did not have time to react, and the mutant grabbed his neck, after which he lifted him above the ground. The teenager tried to generate a divine blade, but he could not do this. The monster said that Mals had a sufficiently strong spiritual energy, and when he absorbs his soul, he will certainly break through to the next stage of development. But suddenly someone attacked the monster, but it was not possible to inflict serious damage. The dead man literally evaporated, leaving behind only a demonic aura. As it turned out, it was Jinghan to help Uhu in a timely manner. At that moment, the mutant reappeared, still holding Shui ordered to immediately let him go. The monster instantly divided into two parts and rushed to Shanu while holding Uhea. Jing was shocked by the abilities of the monster and began to act, saying that he also has something to surprise, after which a certain haze formed, from which an unknown girl appeared after a second. But she was not very happy about Suya's call, having stated that she wanted to sleep properly. But Jinghan asked her to help. Then the warrior rushed towards the dead man to distract attention. What in the final result she managed to do? But the demon continued to hold Uhei. This allowed her to conduct a series of crushing strokes to the monster fierce, which in turn immediately released and his weakened body collapsed to the ground. The demon himself hurried to leave this location and subsequently managed to escape. The business girl defiantly approached the guy with the sword at the ready and said that this is how they had to repulse these monsters. Suddenly, they saw the demonic crystals of the call and hastened to destroy them, so that the monster no longer has the opportunity to come to the hospital for the soul of malts. Finally finishing with crystals, the young warrior suddenly evaporated. The dumbfounded Uhei could not believe his eyes and literally froze in place. Sui noticed that nothing terrible happened, and they simply destroyed the barrier. Then Yi asked if his wounded friend could survive. Shan sighed heavily. Soon they called the doctors who tried to reanimate the mutilated intern. After a certain time, he was taken out on a gurney, and Jing suggested that he would still survive. Uhei, in turn, continued to ask Suya what happened at all. Shan asked a counter-question, and asked if the young man knew what happened 100 years ago when the fog fell. At that moment, he took out a cigarette and not noted that it was forbidden to smoke here. Soon, Jing'an spoke about the time when the dense fog enveloped the whole world. Many believed that this was only a small atmospheric phenomenon, but everything was much more complicated. Because the cities shrouded in fog began to simply disappear, people were horrified. However, for unknown reasons, this phenomenon bypassed their country. Also, China was previously blocked from the inside to protect itself. And when people thought that everything worked out, strange and terrible creatures appeared. They were called foggy monsters, which have the opportunity to penetrate like a cloud outside the barrier. The stronger the demon, the more he looks like an ordinary person. They are also classified by ranks, from F to S. But at the same time, there are monsters of the highest rank. Usually they are highlighted by kings. They look like people, and to recognize such a monster, it is necessary to use the birds of the messengers. But fortunately, high-ranking representatives have not yet been discovered. Uhei asked a logical question. Did his friend really want to eat a foggy demon? Shui looked at the teenager and replied that he actually came for him. Yi in response said that this could not be, because he is an ordinary person. But Shan hastened to dissuade, saying that the guy is the chosen gods, and the internet almost died because of him. And if the monster swallowed the soul of Uhei, he would instantly evolve into a more dangerous creature. The young man took up his head and said sadly that he was again to blame for everything. Jing, in turn, realized that he had gone too far and tried to calm the malts. Then he said that he would better go with him to prevent the death of all mankind. Then he introduced himself as a member of the 114th team and named his name, adding that if Yi jokes to them, that he will forever forget about ordinary mortals. The protagonist unexpectedly refused to join this organization and called Zuya a deceiver. The dumbfounded Jing called him to immediately explain, because no one dares to blame a person of lies without evidence, adding that Cyan is a corporation created by the state, and they recruit such specialists in it. Then Shan presented him his certificate and said that their company was fighting evil. But the young master stood on his own and offered Sui to leave, as he had already made a decision. The shocked agent literally began to shake the teenager, saying that he misses his opportunity to possess divine power. Uhei, with a sharp movement, removed him from his shoulder and once again abandoned this fate. Then he went in an unknown direction, saying that he wants to be an ordinary person. Jing noticed that after the gods chose him, he can no longer be an ordinary person. He suddenly stopped, thinking about everything that happened and recalling his friend. However, the young man did not give a positive answer to Shan, not wanting to contact a similar organization. Returning to his ward, Uhei constantly thought about whether he should join the ranks of Cyan. After all, the opportunity to stay away from ordinary people can benefit him. But for sure he did not know that it would really be better, and what to do in this situation. Blowing his head with various thoughts, he suddenly discovered himself outside the hospital. In this connection, the teenager began to look around and could not understand why he was on the street. At that moment, Number 1 approached him and greeted his boss. His appearance seemed suspicious to the guy, and he asked not to approach him. Suddenly, 1 fell to his knees and stated that he would deceive with his own feelings. The perplexed Uhei urged him to calm down and noted that he had not been like that before. The former head of the Divine Hospital said that he really did not understand him. After all, the last time he saw his brother, and his name is Number 2, the teenager was surprised. Then he stated that they looked the same and may be twins. But Number 2 said that he has a more noble mustache, unlike his brother, by adding that the Number 1 is resting now, since they have a system of sequence. But Uhei is one of a kind. The guy suddenly asked why he returned. The manager smiled and stated that this was his Divine Hospital, and since he unlocked the first ward, now he is obliged to check everything. The young man looked at the hospital and asked if there are patients in the hospital. Number 2 replied that there were a lot of them. Then he led Uhei to his own statue and noticed that this was a delightful work, adding that he remembers the day when the guy became the head of their unique hospital. At the same time, he claimed that his brother did not have time to introduce him to the hospital, because he had prematurely left. Then he began to tell that it has only 8 floors, and on the ground floor there is a hall with a pharmacy and dining room. But the most important thing is Uhaya's office, where number 2 brought his boss. Entering inside, the guy began to look closely, and noticed that there were many racks with books everywhere. The teenager approached one of them and reached for the book, but the servant suddenly objected. Having said that now he could not take these treatises, the surprised E asked why. Because this is his office. Number 2 replied that he was too weak, and these books will contribute to his premature death. The subordinate young men literally moved through the air and invited him to inspect the ward. At the same time, he noticed that the key to the basement was lost and, if necessary, E could look for it. Uhae unexpectedly asked if they were so hopeless. Number 2 answered positively and smiled, having stated that the basement is not so interesting for them, because there is a prison there, and there are absolutely no people. Following them was a dark aura, but they did not have the opportunity to find it. The servant continued to enter the guy in the course of business, and said that he was obliged to fulfill some conditions in order to go to the 3rd floor. Soon they approached one of the chambers and Uhae decided to open it, which was about 2. However, no one answered him. Then the teenager turned around and found that his assistant had disappeared. Looking around the corner, he saw how the manager was running away. The guy was wary. Suddenly, number 2 looked out and wished good luck to his young boss. Uhae could not understand what was happening and why the head physician is so strange. All this was quite suspicious. He suggested that there was something frightening in the ward. But at the same time, he still reached for the door handle and slowly opened the door. Going inside, the main character did not find anyone and looked around. There was an empty hospital bed in front of him. The young master, in turn, thought about it. Suddenly, the door behind him slammed sharply. Uhae was again alerted. The guy immediately ran to the door, but she was locked. The heart literally pounded with fear. At this moment, the system informed the owner that after creating a patient's record, the door will automatically open. The perplexing young man went to bed, realizing that it was empty and not to make records. Then he looked under the bed, but there was also nobody there. He continued to think. Meanwhile, he raised his head and suddenly saw the human silhouette. Then he finally became convinced that in front of him was the ghost of a woman. Her bloody eyes looked right at him. A moment after the corridors of the hospital, a wild scream swept. Number 2 at that moment went to his brother and talked about what had happened. Number 1 asked if this patient is so frightening. Drinking a cup of tea, the brother replied that even in the history of the disease there is nothing, so he does not know. 1, in turn, noticed that he looked at all the books of patients and they are black. The twin was dumbfounded by such a shocking result, because he could not even think that everything was so bad, by stating that the books were divided by color gradation depending on the condition of the patients. Number 1 noticed that the darker the shade, the more serious the disease, but E should cope. Number 2 was not so sure of this, because the last chapter could not even cure gray patients. The brother replied that diseases deteriorate when problems grow into disasters in the world. The twin agreed with him, saying that the last book was black because of the almost destroyed world. They perfectly understood that the teenager would not have to be easy, but Uhae was a capable person. Therefore, they believed in him and naturally decided to help the boss in every way. Meanwhile, E tried to talk a sad patient, but the girl was silent. The young man greeted her, but the gloomy person continued to look at the wall without a sound. However, she did not move at all, which was strange enough. Uhae still tried to talk to her and called himself the local head doctor, then asked her name. At this moment, the system brought in the panel all the available information about the girl, which needed to be cured. From this dossier, the guy found out that her name was Gay, and she was the goddess of the earth from Greek mythology. At the same time, she had the strongest psychological disease. He was extremely surprised. After all, in front of him was the mother of all the gods. But now the goddess looked like a ghost. Uhae could not understand that even the gods themselves could be as patients. After all, it cannot be such that people who built the divine hospital are more powerful than the gods. In addition, the appointment of the chief physician is a complete absurdity, because his skills are clearly not high. Suddenly, the queen of the gods asked why to keep them all here. He did not understand what she was talking about and asked what Gaia had in mind. The girl fell silent sharply. Then she suddenly looked with sad eyes at Uhae and again asked the question why to hold them. From that moment on, it seemed to jam her, and she constantly repeated this issue. The guy was curious who she was talking about and who exactly was held. Gaia again began to repeat these words without answering the teenager's question. A moment later, she completely attacked him and began to strangle him. She could not do anything. Her grip was quite strong, and he could not squeeze the hands of the goddess. After a few seconds, Uhae felt relief and found that she had disappeared. In this connection, the young manager breathed heavily. realizing that there would be another minute, and she would have strangled him. Having looked for a while, the teenager realized that today it would not be possible to get enough sleep, since the morning has already come. He also drew attention to the message from the system that told the history of Gay. How did he find out that the girl actually spoke of her children, imprisoned in the body of Uranus? At the same time, Uho came the idea of how to try to heal the goddess. On the street it was lighting. He never went to bed and continued to think about the treatment of the Queen of the Gods. Meanwhile, inexplicable in his office began to occur in his office. Objects suddenly stirred. Soon, an unknown demon approached the manager's table and put his hand on some notes. Then, as if he began to pull out energy from them to leave a small present to the new head doctor. After some time, the main character finally freed himself from hard work. At that moment, a cousin of younger brother drove up to him on a bicycle, who sharply braked and thereby raised the dust, because of which he was coughed. Lee greeted his brother and asked how he was doing. The young master was surprised at a sudden meeting with him. Then Uhei asked where Jin got this old bicycle. The cousin, in turn, noticed that in 5 years he had not changed at all. The guy asked where the aunt. The boy replied that his mother asked them to go to the cemetery while she finished working. Then he joyfully urged Uhaya to sit on a bicycle to get faster. The dumbfounded E could not understand how to move on such a ruin at all. Lee, in turn, rushed him, saying that there are many traffic jams on the road and it would not work out faster. Finally, Uhei sat near the steering wheel and squeezed his legs, relying on his younger brother, who was absolutely confident in himself. Soon they went to the cemetery. A few minutes later, they successfully arrived at the place where the aunt was already. He went to the parental grave and sadly lowered his eyes down. Everyone was silent sharply. The teenager only asked for forgiveness from his parents because he could not protect them. Suddenly, Jinghan turned to them and asked for permission to approach the grave. She brought a bouquet of flowers and headed for the tombstone. Uhei silently looked at him. An said that of course he could approach the parental grave. But as soon as Shan put the flowers on the stove, he urged him to leave this place. Aunt, in turn, made a remark to his nephew, but Jing asked to talk to him in private. The woman was not opposed, and said that in this case it would be nearby with Lee, by adding that Uhu should not be so aggressive, and it is better to discuss everything to solve the problem. Shui took it to the side. The cousin watched them and could not understand who this person is and what he wants. He only spoke to himself that some things in their life are inevitable. Meanwhile, the guy asked Jinghan why he came, because they had already agreed on everything. Xu took out a cigarette and replied that on that day he expressed himself incorrectly. Then he asked if he was not interested in Archangel Michael, who changed the fate of the young man. The teenager thought, because in fact he tried to understand where this angel came from. As a result, he sat down on a stone and said that he was really curious to learn more about it. Then he asked how the mythical creature broke into their world. Then Jing made a couple of puffs and said that it all started another 1902nd year. At that time the Dean dynasty reigned, and in the city of Jinhua there were 3 people who once decided to reduce the way home through the mountains. But suddenly heavy rain began, and they decided to hide in the nearest cave. However, as soon as they went into the dungeon, lightning struck in their direction. After that, ball lightning rushed into a small clearing and formed a huge hole. One of the wandering travelers decided to look deep into the crater. Subsequently, his friends ran up to him and saw an incredible picture. They saw a man with 6 wings, from which a rather bright light emanated. This was the 3rd deity of China, which turned out to be the same Archangel Michael. Thus, the angel arrived to Earth 22 years before the appearance of fog. But the question is whether the deity called the fog, which was logical since it appeared earlier, or vice versa. But once Michael told one of the wanderers that the fog had gone out of control and would soon overtake them. The dumbfounded Uhei suggested that the fog was previously controlled by a certain creature. However, Jing was not so sure of this, because the gods did not speak a lot. Shui noticed that they conducted a study, and found out that there were 7 deities before the fog. And the more powerful the deity, the stronger his contractor and abilities. And since he elected and much stronger than many, it is he who can save humanity. But Uhei once again abandoned this fate and said that he did not like that, because he lost his parents and wants to preserve at least those relatives who remained with him. Jinghan noted that if the fog is not stopped, then he would not spare anyone. And if the guy still enters their ranks, they will have a chance to prevent a disaster. At that moment, the very warrior who saved E from the monster approached them. The girl immediately greeted the teenager. The young man naturally recognized her savior. At the time before my eyes, that monstrous situation with a foggy demon slipped before my eyes. After that, Sui handed over his business card with the phone number and urged again to think about it well. Soon, members of the 114th team left the cemetery, leaving Uhei alone with their thoughts. The guy did not know what to do. because Shan was partly right, and he perfectly understood it. Meanwhile, the main character went home, where obsessive thoughts did not leave him. The young master constantly looked at Suya's business card and thought about his words. Suddenly, Jin asked him who was the man and why his brother was upset. He asked him a counter-question. He would like to participate in the salvation of the world, if such an opportunity had been introduced. Lee instantly jumped up and stated that if he had the abilities of a superhero, then he would have agreed without hesitation. Of course, Uhei knew that his brother would answer in this way, because the youth is always full of enthusiasm. Then he praised him for the courage and went a little to take a nap to gain strength. At the same time, it was necessary to finally decide in the choice, because his life depended on this. Jin, in turn, looked at his brother, and thought that the matter was not at all enthusiasm. Just no one wants to watch how they destroy his house, and even more so the whole world. In the meantime, he had a good sleep and hurried to return to the Divine Hospital. The guy once again approached his statue, examining it. He thought about what to do. Suddenly, the former manager approached him and greeted his boss. Uhei looked at him and asked if he was the number one. The servant answered positively, adding that he left the history of the patient's disease on his desktop in the head doctor's office. Then he took apart and said that if necessary, E could always turn to him for help. The young man concluded that the number two are not as reliable as his brother, and it is better to deal with him. Soon the teenager went to his office. The second servant began to record what was happening. Where the new manager did not speak flattering about him, the perplexing brother asked what he was doing. Number two replied that he was writing everything down, but his book seemed to his brother rather familiar. The assistant said that he had a lot of similar books, but he left only the one in which there are records of the new boss. At this time, Uhei went to his office and decided to get acquainted with the history of the patient's illness. Suddenly he discovered a key and thought where he came from here and from which door. Without attaching much importance to this, he continued to read the medical card of Gay. However, it indicated everything that Uhei already knew about. Then the guy began to think that he had missed something important. And since the contents that he found truthfully, it means that the disease can still be cured. At this moment, the system asked the owner to pay attention to the terminal stage of this disease. He took the key and left his office, where the helpful assistant was waiting for him. Number one showed him a tray with various goodies and said that the time had come after the afternoon tea. However, Uhei decided to refuse, which naturally extremely surprised the servant. At the same time, the young boss showed a desire to first examine the patient Gaia. At the same time, he handed him the key found in his office and asked what he was. The number one answered, from the basement. The extremely surprised guy asked him, was he really? Because earlier the assistant claimed that the key was lost. The servant was also surprised and asked where Uhei found him. The teenager said that he was lying on the history of Gay's disease, adding that most likely one of the employees found him and brought him to his office. In connection with the overcoming curiosity, the young man went to the basement, which one announced the number. However, the assistant unexpectedly blocked his path and said that this could not be done, because to open the basement, it is necessary to cure the patient at least 1%. He suspected something was wrong and asked if there was something strange in the basement. The servant replied that this was quite possible. Uhei, in turn, noticed that they had too many unnecessary rules in the hospital. Then he left in an unknown direction. At that moment, number two ran up to his brother. He asked if she had returned. The number one answered negatively, realizing that at such a pace, he would be affected by trouble. The teenager, meanwhile, went to the Gay chamber and mentally tuned himself that everything would be fine. Then he pulled the door handle and went inside the room where the Queen of the Gods was sitting on the bed. The guy greeted her and asked if she remembered him. The girl said nothing in response. Suddenly, her eyes lit up with a magic light. The young man backed away. A moment later, Gaia reached for him with her own hands, but Uhei dodged in time. Then he pretended to be her child and said that he missed his mother. The goddess immediately changed in her face, as if she really saw her child in him. E continued to pretend that he was her son, and came closer to Gaia. The girl looked at him silently. The teenager, in turn, burst into tears and said that she completely forgot about him. The Queen of the Gods again began to change in the face, as if doubts began to torment her. Because in its state it was extremely difficult not to build illusions for yourself. The main character was so carried away by pretense that it seemed that he himself believed in what was happening. Suddenly, Gaia noted that his appearance had changed, because earlier he was a cyclop. The young master began to think about how to proceed, completely forgetting that her children are mutants. As a result, E said that the second eye had recently grew up. The girl asked how this is possible. In addition, he behaves quite strangely. Uhei again began to think how he would get out. However, nothing entertained came to mind. It was necessary to quickly come up with at least something until Gaia exposed him. Then the young man said that he adapted to human life and, with the help of local medicine, changed his appearance. The goddess was at a loss and continued to look silently at the joyful E, after which she raised her right hand with a sharp movement. The guy thought it was the end. In this connection, he closed his eyes and began to wait for further actions from Gaia. However, after a couple of seconds, the girl hugged him, and the young man sighed with relief. Then the Queen of the Gods sadly said that her poor diet had a hard time. At this moment, the system announced that the progress of the treatment of the goddess reached 3%, and he can use the patient's book. Uhei sincerely rejoiced at such news and continued to play the role of the child. Gaia, in turn, did not let the child out of her arms and was simply silent. The servants were watching everything that was happening, which discussed how hard their boss had to. Number 1 urged his brother to be more helpful to him, but Number 2 reminded him that today his change and need to tell the manager about the non-effectiveness of treatment. After all, he did not even pay attention to the word disease in the medical card of Gay. After some time, E left the ward of the goddess and went to his assistants. The guy asked what they wanted to talk about with him. The brothers silently looked at him. After that, Number 2 said that his brother just wanted to cook noodles. Then he immediately headed for the exit, which was strange enough. Uhei, in turn, suggested that they hide some information from him and took one of the books from the shelf. But when the teenager opened it, he found absolutely clean sheets of paper. At that moment, Number 1 imperceptibly approached him and called out to him. Then he said that his treatment is extremely ineffective and should think about it. He was bewilderment and said that it was stupid, diagnosed and after looking for an answer in the book, by adding that you can simply give the book to the patient so that she personally finds the correct diagnosis. Soon the nervous Uhei sat down at the table and asked the assistant where the Book of Emperor Yan is located. The servant replied that she was inside his body, and this happened after the signing of the contract. The surprised E again asked how to use this treatise. The Number 1 apologized to the young boss and said that no one knew this. The dumbfounded Uhei noticed that this divine hospital is a continuous problem. After that, the teenager went to his house in order to relax a bit and lay down on the bed. The obsessive thoughts literally crashed into his mind. He constantly thought about how to use the Book of Emperor Yan. But at the same time, the guy perfectly understood that even with her help, he could not get into the divine kingdom. At this time, he heard the incomprehensible sounds of the calico outside and headed for the window. Opening one window sash, he suddenly discovered a Jingshan, who was trying to climb into his room. Yu smiled and greeted Uhaya. The guy was shocked by what was happening. After all, it was simply unthinkable, because it climbed almost to the roof of the house, since the apartment was located on the 22nd floor, but for Shan it was not a problem. Naturally, the teenager let him into his house, and Jing sat on a chair, saying that he was a little tired. The perplexed young man asked why he needed to get into his window. Yu smiled and, as always, took out a cigarette, noting that he could not do otherwise. The shocked Uhei could not understand what was happening at all, and what he was driving away. Shan, meanwhile, reached out into the inner pocket of his jacket and asked him to extend his hand. Yi extended his hand and Jing handed him a certain envelope. The teenager asked what it was. Jing called him to look at the contents of the envelope, where there was a lot of money. The guy was indignant and returned the envelope to him, saying that he did not need the money of his organization. But unexpectedly, Shui said that this is a compensation for the death of his parents. Uhei was shocked by this statement and crushed the envelope with money from anger. After that, he asked if their death was not an accident. Jingshan said nothing. Then Shan made a couple of puffs and said sadly that everything was not entirely true, adding, "Today the captain received a document from the authorities, which states that the death of his parents is connected with the file S." The dumbfounded protagonist asked what kind of file it was and what it has to do with his family. Wei explained that these are the code names of several classified documents of the organization, and everything exists A, B, and S. Files are concerned within the country, for example, the murder of a red eye that occurred several years ago. B relate to business outside the atmosphere, and even with its access level, it cannot get data about these files, while the files relate to the gods and are even more classified. At the same time, the Mito Crater case will be open only after the appearance of the Divine Kingdom of Uhai. Only one question was interested in how to find out the details about his parents. Shan said that in order to remove the secrecy of the case, it was that the divine phenomenon again comes to their world. But there is another method. For this, it is necessary to achieve a certain rank in their organization in order to read these files. At that moment, Shu put his hand on his shoulder, but the young man beat her off and said that he would not be able to recruit him. Jing once again said that he simply brought compensation and decide only to himself. Meanwhile, Wei and the head of Bai decided to take a lunch break and cut the watermelon. The girl noticed that he was really very sweet. The boss smiled. After which they discussed Uhai's unsuccessful recruitment. The captain suddenly stated that he might not need to be invited to the team. The perplexing servant asked why she said so. At that moment, Nanshin unexpectedly entered the room and said that fate would decide everything. The girls were happy with the sudden appearance of the deputy captain of 144th team. Zhao also greeted the girls and decided to make them a company to have a bite. Wei noticed that Chan should think more about the feelings of others. Bai, in turn, in one vote with Nanama stated that this was secret information. However, the girl did not stop and said that she was usually shared by secrets. A moment later, the captain became ill and she sharply grabbed her head. The servant asked what was the matter. Bai replied that a large cloud of fog appeared next to the house E and they need to rush. At this time, Jinghan said goodbye to Uhei and said that it was time for him to return. Seeing that he was climbing back out the window, the young man asked him to leave the door. Yu smiled and said that he had mixed up out of habit, after which he headed towards the door. The guy noticed that it is better not to get used to this, because one day you cannot calculate. After a couple of seconds, they heard incomprehensible sounds and ran to the window. Shan looked out the window and saw a huge cloud of fog, which he informed the teenager. Yi also looked down and found an incredible number of lights in a thick fog. In this connection, they immediately rushed towards Li's room, who played video games. Running past the brother, Uhei called him to stay at home and not go anywhere. The shocked cousin asked where this man came from in their apartment. Yi once again asked him to be in his room and said that now is not the time to discuss this. The boy thought that this was a certain game and blurred in a smile said he understood everything. Seeing that the young man did not take the demand seriously, the guy again ordered him to obey him. Then he rushed after Shuba to the exit. The child did not understand what was happening, but at the same time, he still remained in his room, not going to argue with the nervous brother. After a couple of minutes, they were on the street, where there were a huge number of foggy monsters. Uhei spoke, then they will have it hard, because there are more than a dozen demons. Jing urged the teenager not to climb into a wound and said that he himself would deal with them. But Yi hastened to object to him and generated a huge divine blade. At the same time, he said that the sword himself was asking out, and he would not stand aside. Then Shui asked him to stay together and work in the team to survive. At that moment, Shanya's blade was nourished with magical blood. Uhei was struck by Jin's skills. Hu, in turn, began to stick weapons into the ground. He simply watched what was happening. Thus, Zhui was generated by the protective barrier. He began to expand throughout the district. In the end result, the magical shield clasped several houses and continued to increase in size. Jinghan inserted another cigarette into his teeth and noticed that this was a seal, and each member of the organization knows about this skill. Adding that in the future he will learn this, but the main character again refused to join their ranks. Meanwhile, Shu called his fighting girlfriend with a huge blade. Then the young master asked why he had the ability to call a person. A self-confident agent replied that he would tell about this when they deal with monsters. After which they bravely rushed into battle. Uhai also did not stand aside and came to their aid. At the same time, Yi asked his sword, where he disappeared all this time and right now he decided to appear. Naturally, the blade did not answer him. The young man was really not going to join the organization of Xian. However, he was obliged to exterminate the monsters, in connection with which he joined Shanu with his warrior. The monsters, in turn, continued to push, as if hoping for their numerical advantage. But bold agents skillfully dealt with foggy demons, tearing them into pieces. Uhei was not inferior to masters in combat abilities and also exterminated evil spirits. But at a certain moment, one of the monsters attacked him and began to restrain his sword. He well realized that there are too many monsters and not to kill everyone. In the end result, the demon was able to knock out the blade from the hands of the teenager and continued to attack him. The young man backed back, realizing that he had fallen in a pattern situation and there was no hope of salvation. But Sui extremely arrived in time for his aid and attacked a foggy ghost. For a long time, Jinshan could not cope with him, but continued to apply a series of blows. A moment later, the agent still found a gap in the defense of the monster and destroyed it. Then he said that, unfortunately, he did not have the ability to spiritual kingdom. Thus, there was no possibility to build his possibilities, which the teenager was extremely surprised. Yi began to ask him questions, but Shan again delayed the conversation for later. At this moment, the warrior Jing managed to get the divine blade of Uhai. In this connection, she instantly handed it to the young owner. The guy caught the sword and rushed into battle again. At the same time, the teenager actively used his incredible abilities, one of which happened perfectly on mass purposes. Thus, in just a couple of seconds, I defeated a dozen demons. The fierce battle lasted for some more time, and finally, all the ghosts were defeated. which could not but rejoice the warriors, but the danger did not pass, since other monsters appeared. The dumbfounded Shu said, clearly something was wrong with them, and again rushed into battle. At this moment, they drew attention to the dark aura that came from afar. The newly made army of ghosts once again rushed in their direction. But suddenly the leader of the demons appeared on the battlefield. He looked like man. Jing said that this is a monster of the rank with, and maybe higher. Usually they are called foggy spirits. Uhe, in turn, urged the agent to cause reinforcement, because they could not cope with two. Jinghan was absolutely calmly smoked another cigarette, and said that he had already done it. But if they still have not arrived, then something could happen to them. Meanwhile, the protective magic barrier successfully clasped one of the districts of the city. Also, the 114th team, together with Nanshan, were at the entrance. Wei was dumbfounded when she saw a huge cloud of dense fog. A member of the 144th team, Ninin, could not understand what was so special in E, because the foggy monsters literally filled the area. Zhang suddenly asked his partner Si, "Is it true that if you eat a piece of meat of Uhe, then you can live forever?" The perplexing Zhui replied that she had no idea, and this does not bother her absolutely. The stupid said that as soon as she met him, she would definitely taste a piece. However, it was at that moment that one of the monsters landed on their car. The frightened Wei braked sharply, and the car stopped. After a moment, the demons surrounded them. The team did not know what to do in this situation, because the monsters were everywhere. Bai, in turn, decided to use the ice blocks, which after a couple of seconds covered most of the foggy ill-wishers. Soon, all members of both teams left their cars and gathered in one place. Captain Lu, in turn, reported that among the monsters there are 5 foggy perfumes of rank S. Ninin prematurely began to panic and said that they were trapped, having added that there are too many of them and they can't cope, all the more there are stronger demons. However, a moment later, Jiang jumped into the most epicenter of monsters with her pistols. It seemed that the girl was mad and began to calmly shoot ghosts, supposing that she is ready to kill them all, which ultimately happened. In just a few seconds, Ninin destroyed several dozen monsters. Wei urged her not to make herself a hero and be extremely careful, but this did not affect her in any way. The captain immediately ordered a Chu to find a sniper position, and Bai take up a long attack. Battle girls immediately began to fulfill the order and scattered around. But Wei nevertheless decided to speed up the process and grabbed Sai by the collar, after which she jumped with her to the high building. Ninin continued to shoot distraught monsters and thereby covered the Saboler. At a certain moment, Bai asked which building is better to take. Sai saw a high-rise building in front of me and said that the roof is an ideal sniper position. Bai instantly built an ice platform and climbed along it to get to the roof of the building. Then she let it go into a free flight, saying that she herself would get. Nanshan was dumbfounded by what was happening and thought about whether everything would be with Si. The sniper, in turn, from a great height flew a stone down onto the roof of the building. But in the end, she landed absolutely calmly. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Captain Lu noticed that she was really tenacious and physically prepared. Zhao, in turn, said that he also considers himself quite tenacious. The leader of the 114th team asked Chen to look after Ninin. Nan was extremely surprised, because he believed that he himself would go into battle and would help the rest. However, instead, he had to play the role of a nanny, which he did not really want to do. At the same time, Zhao perfectly understood that the current youth is very difficult to educate. By that time, Captain Lu began to activate the magic barrier. Her body was instantly covered with numerous green discharges of lightning. After that, the head of the team touched the ground with his hand, and lightning parted on the asphalt. Thus, Bai activated the protective barrier, which began to disperse in all directions. At that moment, she saw unknown human silhouettes in front of her. It seemed that the shadows, as if looking at her, all this looked rather strange. But suddenly she lit up that in fact it was the red eyes of a dark ghost. Lu immediately remembered recent events at the headquarters of this organization, where all senior officers were convened for a certain meeting due to the incident in Jinhua. The captain noted that if the city is really under threat, then they will be able to go down in history. After some time, the boss entered and asked the others if they heard about what happened in Jinhua. Then he sent Lu to the responsible task. Of course, she agreed to help. Sina boss gave out a mission to deal with foggy monsters and handed over the reduction of the red eye. Yi promised to do everything possible in order not to allow fog spread throughout the city. This prompted the idea that he could actually be involved in what was happening. At this time, the leader of the 114th team completely enveloped the green flame. Bai immediately got up from her knees and began to exterminate extremely annoying monsters. The protagonist, in turn, along with the Jinshan, opposed the foggy spirit. The young master asked Zhuya if he had not yet documented his cigarette. Shan smiled and replied that this was the last time. Of course, he caught the ironic notes in Jing's voice. Then they rushed together towards a ferocious ghost to finally end him. Also, the warrior called up to their aid, but everything was not so simple. After all, the demon took advantage of the magic barrier that simply absorbed all the damage. They were shocked by the power of the monster, realizing that it would not be easy to cope with him. The monster himself called them miserable people and hastened to demonstrate his abilities. Thus, the foggy ghost held a lightning and successful attack, as a result of which the swords of the main characters simply collapsed, which was extremely unexpected. After which the demon once again carried out a series of blows towards the young master and Cyan agents. Subsequently, they failed to evade and they collapsed to the ground, realizing that he was rather strong. Shinhan also did not meet such a dangerous enemy over many years of service. Uhei raised himself and wondered where the monster had such an incredible power, adding that they need to think over the tactics of the battle, since otherwise they will not survive. Shui, as always, lit a cigarette and said that apparently they have no choice. After that, literally in a couple of puffs, the cigarette was smoking and spat out the cigarette butt. Then he took out a certain object and threw it to the ground, from which the bloody aura began to leave. Shan said that earlier he asked him about why his spirit was a man. But in fact, this is far from an ordinary person, but his older sister. The dumbfounded guy will look at the brave warrior, as if trying to find a resemblance to Jin. Sui said that one day she was killed by foggy perfume, but she found the courage to share one body with him. The agent of 114th team again generated a bloody blade. And after that, he said that now he will demonstrate his true spiritual kingdom. Shan raised his sword up and thereby called a certain whirlwind. Uhei was shocked by his abilities. Having smoked another cigarette, Jing urged a young man to see his powerful power. Sister Zuya instantly rushed towards the monster. His brother rushed after her. Their magic blades literally burned with bloody fire. I never saw such a thing. Soon, the demon began to retreat, as he felt the unimaginable power of agents. Jing'an, in turn, continued to push and apply a series of blows. The foggy monster tried to evade attacks, but he hardly managed to do it. Feeling their advantage in battle, team members did not stop attacking a mutant. At a certain moment, Shu activated the Kingdom of the Spirit and his blows became much stronger. At the same time, his sister also gained unimaginable power. It seemed that the demon could not live. The monster did not have time to do anything and only received significant damage. But suddenly everything changed dramatically, and the foggy ghost also became stronger. Thus, he had the opportunity to ignore some attacks of agents. After that, the mutant himself rushed in their direction, at the same time crushing blows. Then Uhei decided to help them and attacked an angry demon. Then he said that Sui really has incredible power. A moment later, the bloody flame literally absorbed the monster, and he slowly burned out. Everyone sighed with relief, believing that it was all over and the monster left their world. The wounded Shan noticed that for the first time in his life, he used his spiritual kingdom, which took most of his energy, as a result of which he collapsed to the ground. He was shocked and rushed to his partner, realizing that he was now extremely weak. Uhei did not know what to do and how to help Jin, who tried to get up. However, he did not succeed. The teenager lifted him and leaned on himself. Wei, in a stifled voice, said that he was still able to defeat the foggy spirit from the rank. He once again stated that he is really a very strong master and has serious skills. At that moment, his sister approached him and smiled sweetly, extending her hand. Uhei did not understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the girl's silhouette slowly disappeared. Jing Han, in turn, spoke the last words that he would finally be with his sister. After a couple of seconds, his eyes closed. A sweet smile only froze on his face. His hand gradually dropped to the ground. The dumbfounded young man could not believe in what had happened, and even burst into tears. Then he published a loud roar and burst into tears like a child, realizing that they would not meet anymore. At this moment, his body began to radiate a bright light ray and rushed into heaven. Meanwhile, the next army of foggy ghosts of high rank came to him. Their leader also went towards Uhei, realizing that the melee is really not so simple. The suddenly approaching monster began to thank the guy. He turned sharply. He saw in front of him a no less terrible high-ranking demon and was alert. But in fact, everything was not quite as the main character imagined. After all, the spirit of the Range Sea has not died, but on the contrary, evolved, which he asked him Uhei. The joyful lord of foggy demons said that he really switched to the next stage of development, and he even got the ability of Jinghan, which he fully demonstrated. The abundant flame enveloped his hand, and soon the whole body the young master was shocked by such a turn of events. Suddenly the mutant attacked him, literally erupting his fire. He backed back. Then he instantly generated his divine blade, but this did not help him. Because, having inflated, the sword simply began to crack and in the end resulting. Subsequently, what the explosion occurred, the foggy leader believed that the teenager was over. However, in the scattering fog, he saw a wounded Uhai who began to crawl in the dead Jin. The guy understood that everything could not end like this, because Shan gave his life to save him. From this unbearable thought, the teenager was literally distraught. He did not want to put up with the like. As a result, his frantic rage led to the activation of secret abilities. The body of the young man instantly declared magic light, and he began to stand on his feet. The system immediately informed the owner that his wounds were successfully prolonged, and he was healthy. Thus, Uhei again appeared before the foggy demon of high rank. The monster, in turn, was dumbfounded. He did not expect such an excerpt from the baby. Yi, in turn, tried to pick up the body of Jinghan, hoping that he would still be able to reanimate. However, the foggy demon prevented this and let out the next portion of the flame into it. But the guy understood that the ghost would try to prevent him and activated the divine shield. After which, he suddenly grew golden wings, and he took Suya's body away. Then he said that he had to end this monster once and for all, adding that once he wanted to be a simple person, which he was very mistaken in, since it seemed to him that the further he is from the organization of Xi'an, the calmer life. But this was not so at all, so the time came to act decisively. The teenager's eyes were filled with bright flaming light. He immediately hurried to the Lord of Spirits. At the same time, his holy blade again burst out, which Uhei was incredibly happy. Indeed, in order to become an ordinary person, he needs to destroy all the evil. The monster, in turn, began to back, realizing what power However, he never managed to hide from the ferocious attacks of the Divine Master, who rushed to him and inflicted an incredible power of a blow, piercing the body of the ghost. Previously, a high-ranking demon did not see such power from a representative of people. In the end result, the mutant collapsed to the ground, filling it with his blood. Suddenly, the young man felt weak in the body and realized that he could not finish him off, because he spent a huge amount of spiritual energy and fell to the ground. At that moment, Wei came to his aid and asked for forgiveness for being late. Then she began to look around and asked the guy, "Where the Shan?" Uhei changed sharply in his face. Meanwhile, the rest of the agents arrived in time. Suddenly, they saw Suya's body and were shocked by this picture. Ninan burst into tears and could not believe what had happened, just like all team members. Bai asked how this is possible because Jing was one of the strongest warriors. Nanshan quietly said that he was again late and could not help his loved ones. Chu, in turn, did not restrain her tears and slowly headed towards Shan. The team stared silently on the floor, experiencing not the most pleasant feelings. Suddenly, the eye of a foggy ruler lit up with a red spin, and he turned around. Then, with all his might, he tried to attack Sai with a fiery beam. The girl immediately applied the barrier, but Wei was ahead of the events and restrained the monster's blow. Thus, her ice swallowed the flame. Bai fell into rabies and hurried to end a high-ranking mutant. With the help of her icy abilities, the warrior brought down a series of attacks on the demon, after which she completely called on the ice goddess to finally send the monster to hell. The called Frosty Queen immediately applied the most powerful skill. As a result, dozens of ice fragments literally flew into the foggy lord. Subsequently, the explosion thundered. Everyone was sure that the monster did not survive. However, even under the block of ice, the foggy ruler remained during his lifetime. Then Wei began to use all her equipment in her arsenal. A moment later, an ice dragon appeared and rushed towards the monster. Bai also followed him to inflict a mortal blow to the demon. In the final result, another explosion thundered, but the warrior did not stop there, rolling more and more ferocious attacks on a barely living foggy ghost. Finally, the monster was defeated, and Wei returned to the team with a clear conscience. Glancing at the lifeless body of Jinghan, the girl again lowered her sad look down. Members of the Xi'an organization still could not believe what had happened and said goodbye to Xiub. A week later, the agent was buried, which was extremely difficult for everyone, since the procedure was by no means fun. The main character leaned toward the grave and thanked Shan for everything that he had done for him. Then the young master put a pack of cigarettes on the stove and said that now he could calmly smoke. Captain Lu quietly said that Jing was an avid smokeman, although the doctors forbade him. Then the leader of the 114th Command laid a lighter nearby, saying that it would not hurt. The girl once again looked at her photo and added that he was obliged to share with others. And if there is not enough cigarettes for everyone, then it will bring more. Soon silence came again. Suddenly, Uhai asked if Jinashan could be happy in the afterlife. Bai noticed that it was quite possible. Besides, he knew the best of all what the deceased needed. After all, Sui constantly visited his counterparts. At that moment, Lu looked around the graves nearby. He was surprised. After that, he asked, did they really sacrifice themselves for the sake of Xinhua's safety? The captain sadly replied that they were all members of their organization. But the most important thing is that in the near future, there are no more tombstones in the cemetery. adding that no one can know the future, and perhaps they will once come to Uhei's grave. A few minutes later, the head ordered everyone to return to their duties. Suddenly he said that he wanted to join their organization. Everyone was in shock. Lu replied that if it was because of Suya, then there was no so far away. Because he sacrificed himself for the sake of all mankind, and not just for his sake. However, the young man said that Jessen's death has nothing to do with it, and there is another reason. Having said that absolutely everyone can benefit the world if he fights on the side of good. The leader of the team was literally numb from such words of the teenager. She did not expect to hear this, and held out her hand to him, and said that in this case, he was accepted in Xi'an. Uhei smiled in response to her and shook his hand, saying that he would do his best to prevent a catastrophe. Soon, they took the corporation to the camp. The guy wandered around the base rooms with admiration. However, he perfectly understood how serious this organization is. After a certain time, Ninin brought him to one of the rooms and sat him on a chair. Then she asked if he had a girlfriend or guy. Uhei was shocked by such a question. In this connection, the young man did not know how to answer him, and began to mumble something inadvertently. At that moment, a dissatisfied Wei approached them, and asked what was happening here. Jiang ignored her and sat next to her girlfriend Jui. C was at a loss. The girl for a long time carefully examined them. Uhei did not understand what she was planning. Suddenly, Ninin enthusiastically said that they are very suitable for each other. What Nanshan did not like, and he gave a slap to his student. Zhang was offended, and said in revenge that for some reason he could not hide his admiration for Captain Lu. Bai heard her replica and choked on water, then urged everyone to take more serious things to the entry into their ranks E, adding that she had already transmitted information about him to the higher management and soon should be approved. Meanwhile, the restless Ninin decided to hold Uhu a tour of their camp. The perplexing Jui simply watched what was happening and could not understand what Jiang conceived. At this moment, the head of the 114th team came a message from the leadership. Lu read the notification and asked Zhao to look at the shocking result. The report said that E can be taken only as a temporary employee to this position. Chan could not understand why they made a similar decision and what it was connected with. The captain also began to reflect on it. Nan put her hand on her shoulder and said that apparently the young man had a special path, adding that they need to think about how to finish the matter. At this time, Ninin took the protagonist in all rooms of their base and showed where the living room is located. Then she took it to the kitchen and invited the young master to drink something. The teenager replied that she could choose a drink to her taste, since it does not matter to him. Zhang took soda water and noticed that he could take absolutely everything in the refrigerator. And in cases, he can ask his mother Zhao to cook him something tasty. Having added that she constantly controls everyone, and especially Nansheng, so she was nicknamed, but she clearly succeeded in cooking. After that, Jiang called the guy to be ready, as newcomers always undergo intensive preparation. Because their organization is a cohesion group of people, and it is necessary to train a lot to become its member. And then in a real fight, he will know how to behave and will be able to think strategically. But semi-war preparation will begin after half a month, so that during this time everyone gets used to. Uhei began to understand that here really everyone works hard for the common good, since there were many cases when the student stated that he was ready for everything, but on the battlefield simply escaped. He immediately said that he was not one of those who are afraid of the monsters. All the more, already dealt with them. The girl also said that they do not provide housing, and he would need to undergo training with the squad commander. A surprised teenager asked what exactly he would be taught there. At that moment, Lu and Zhao entered their room and said that she personally felt the soil. And at the moment, his abilities in shooting and hand-to-hand combat are clearly not up to the norm. Nanshan noted that he should not be scared of this, since in fact everything is not so scary. But it is vital that it is premature not to play in the box, and not to replenish the ranks in the cemetery. A moment later, Wei joined them and noticed that he would really have to work hard, in order not to become easy prey for monsters, and especially high-ranking demons. Adding that usually spiritual areas are manifested in several types of people. The first type is soldiers deployed near the foggy spirits, and because of constant proximity, they easily activate the spiritual areas. The second type is people who constantly face death. They include doctors, nurses, or funeral services. The third type is family inheritance, and if the elder has spiritual areas, then most likely their descendants will appear. Thus, they have a base for the development of the spiritual area, except for the second type. This is especially true for the third type, because they train their children from a small age. However, with the extremely low level of Uhai, it is likely to be easily beaten. At this moment, the main character recalled the school years, where they constantly mocked him. In this connection, E, naturally, wanted to become stronger and timely to repulse in cases. Suddenly, the young master asked what type he belongs to. Everyone thought, realizing that in fact he has a chance to become a powerful warrior. But this requires a lot of effort and time. Suddenly, Wei called out Nanya. Zhao, in turn, broke into a malicious grin and approached the teenager. The perplexed Uhei asked her what she was talking about and what he needs to do. Captain Lu hastened to answer that he did not need to do anything and urged simply not to pay attention. At that moment, Bai went up to him and said that she was aware of his divine kingdom, where he was discovered, adding that he belongs to the fourth type of people, because such representatives get access to the deity for unknown reasons. And in fact, her divine kingdom also belongs to this type. The guy was surprised. Suddenly, the girl pulled the sleeve to clearly demonstrate what she was talking about. Burning her shoulder, she showed a red spot on it. The young man came closer to examine him. Then Bai said, she received her deity from the bite of the fish. He asked what kind of fish it was. We replied that it was a catfish. For a moment, a grave silence came in the room. Uhei could not understand how this is generally possible that something similar would happen from the bite of the fish. At that moment, Ninin laughed loudly, which brought the young man at a loss. Zhang literally could not calm down, and for an incomprehensible reason continued to laugh into her voice. Finally, he asked Zhang that she found such a funny thing in this. Nanshan, in turn, noted that it was she still trying to restrain herself, adding that they do not have housing for students, but it will be easier for him to get home. In connection with which Uhei asked where in this case he was in this case, Zhao smiled. At that moment, Wei went to the main character and put her hand on his shoulder. Then she said that he could still live with her, since there is another room. The young master thanked her for the help provided. The girl said that for her it was trifles. After which Uhei went to inspect his new house. All just held his gaze. As soon as the guy got out of the room, Lu hit Chan and said that they almost spoke. Nan, in turn, asked if she was going to tell him the truth about his parents. The head of 114th team sighed heavily, but did not answer the question. Soon Bai nevertheless stated that she had to wait until he reaches a suitable level. Wei and Ninin at that time brought Yi to his new house, which looked rich enough. The girl went to the reader of the face. The system instantly determined the hostess. As a result, the huge gate immediately opened. Bai kindly invited the young man to her home. Uhei was shocked by the size of this mansion. He could not even think that she had such a chic housing, where there were charming front gardens and no less beautiful and spacious villa. Zhang smiled and stated that he would have to get used to the fact that Wei is very rich. Bai herself apologized to Yi for the mess in the courtyard, which no one had cleaned for a long time. But Uhaya was interested in completely different, and he asked if her parents would object. The girl took a couple of steps forward and turned sharply, saying that they had been gone for a long time. The teenager immediately fell silent, paying attention to her extremely sad look. But Wei decided to tell that when they left her alone by boat, mother and dad went to look for treasures at the bottom of the sea. In the end result, they disappeared without a trace, and a huge shark almost ate it. But fortunately, she in a timely manner gained miraculous forces, which helped her survive. The protagonist in a sad voice asked her forgiveness, saying that he was insanely sorry. However, the girl smiled and said that everything was already in order, especially since it was a long time ago. Soon they went inside the chic estate of Bai. Yi was in anticipation. Opening the main doors, Wei said that now her life was beautiful and she was satisfied with everything. Meanwhile, the evening came and Lu contacted a higher leadership. The head of the operational department, Yu, reported that she read the captain of the 114th team. Bai confidently stated that the red eye of the foggy spirit would not advance deep into Jinhua. Zhao agreed with her and said that this was due to the instability of the city, but Uhei would take care of everything. At that moment, Nanchen entered the leader's office and noticed that this time she did not give any warnings. Ye smiled and stated that they had not seen him for a long time. The guy smiled. The girl also answered a cute smile and continued her speech about Jinhua, which has recently been extremely unstable and gradually turned into ruins. Chung said that if you destroy the source of problems, the city is stabilizing. But Zhao unexpectedly redirected his sharp statement towards Captain Lu. The head of the team herself said that she had not noticed anything unusual recently, and when she exterminated a huge amount of monsters, the fog only increased in size. What was an understandable phenomenon for them, but there was still a problem. And she, of course, must be solved as soon as possible until the city has turned into ruins. The chairman asked what the proposals would be on this matter. Bai could not give an exact answer, but she knew one thing for sure: the fog was scared. Nan, in turn, suggested that only the deity can really force the fog to retreat. In this regard, the leader of the team asked Yu to whether the deities could reappear. Zhao confidently replied that this would definitely not happen, at least in the near future, adding that most likely the case is in the fog of the highest level. after which she decided to demonstrate something special. The chairman brought several fragments with demons on the screen and said that a new type of creature was recently discovered. It was a rather disgusting monster. Lu suggested that it was a Nuya, but Yu hastened to say that apparently this is Lamia. Everyone was surprised. After all, they did not expect such a turn of events in any way, which was fundamentally changed. Zhao also noticed that this was a monster from ancient Greek mythology, which is considered a half-man, half-half, and it eats exclusively by children. Nanshan made a completely logical conclusion that such creatures may also appear in their city. Yu sighed heavily and replied that, unfortunately, it would really happen. The leader of the 114th team asked whether there are many such demons. Zhou said that at the moment there is only one Lamami, but this is already a problem.